We've all heard this term or a variation of it: pandemic fatigue, crisis burnout, whatever you call it, it exists, and it's not going away anytime soon. We're digging into how we've managed and are managing as the pandemic moves on with us day after day, week after week, month after month. From research to lived experiences, join us today as we discuss our journey as the pandemic continues to be in our lives and doesn't show any signs of letting up. Welcome to Beyond Camp, where we explore the intersection of camp in our lives. For too long, camp professionals have referred to camp as being in a bubble, and we're here to burst that bubble. We all know that camp intersects with every aspect of our lives. We're excited to delve into those. We are your hosts, Rachel Ken. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Cassie Bloy. My pronouns are also she, her.
And we're here to go beyond camp with you. As a reminder, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today, and be sure to check out the show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. Now, let's get started. This is a big topic today, folks. It's not going to be easy. As Cassie and I prepped to chat about it, we were just emotionally exhausted even just after writing some notes and doing some research. So we appreciate you all tuning in and remind you to take care of yourself, take breaks, and take care of yourself afterwards. So the big topic on the table today is pandemic fatigue. It sometimes feels like the elephant in the room. It also sometimes feels like the neon sign that won't stop flashing at us. The pandemic is here, and it sure looks like it's here to stay for a while. And pandemic fatigue is a new term for many of us that we haven't heard before, because this is the first pandemic we've all lived through, hopefully the last. So Cassie, being our research guru, what have you found for us?
So, pandemic fatigue. It's a new term that we're hearing for the first time, but it's not new. But one of the things that I noticed when I started this research was that this isn't new to the globe. It's just new to those of us living on it right now. So it's been just over a century since we've been in a global pandemic. So it is new to us. And
like, that's fascinating to me, because it's so rare in this globalized world that we live in that we experience something truly new. And especially because we have so much research and data available on the internet, it's so easy for us to share that information, that it's rare that we're faced with a situation that we can't draw on people's pretty similar experience.
Exactly. And that's where this whole learning, and I think it comes with we don't have this experience, so how do we cope? And we haven't had a chance to build resiliency around this. But I want to just touch on the actual definition that they give us for a bit first. Mm-hmm. Not only is it pandemic fatigue, but it's crisis fatigue. And we'll make sure we put all the links in the show notes for you guys as well, so you can see where we found this. There are sources that we trust: Johns Hopkins University, UCLA, Mental Health Canada, all places that I have a pretty good feeling about. But crisis fatigue, it's a phenomenon that occurs as the body attempts to adapt after feeling overwhelmed and stressed.
That's fascinating that it's actually a physical experience that we're having. It's not just a mental thing. It's actually something that our body is physically reacting to.
Exactly. So as I read more and more, they were talking about flight or fight. I like to always include freeze in that as well. And how do we feel after one of those? A flight or flight moment. I always get my words jumbled around that one. But we usually feel tired, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because our bodies released increased amounts of cortisol and adrenaline to get us through that moment. So our body's been releasing cortisol and adrenaline for how long now, right?
Yeah, 6-7 months in some cases. I think of how tired we feel, after something stressful has happened at camp, if you have to call an ambulance, or you can't find a camper for a period of time. And then afterwards, there's this collective, a personal exhaustion and a collective exhaustion. Mm-hmm. But from what you're saying, it sounds like we're just constantly in that without that chance to catch up in between.
Exactly, because we're always taking in new information. We're always taking in adjustments to the recommendations and safety precautions that we need to adjust to. And that's hard in its own. It's like setting new habits in our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And except that if you get the habits wrong, people will get very sick or could die.
Exactly. And we should probably note at this point that I believe both of us are very much pro-mask people. We want to be safe and we want to protect our communities.
Yes. And so I think the part that is new to us, and why I was sort of laughing, is that it's the first time that a lot of us have had to form habits because of such an incredible sense of urgency. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's the first time that we've had to, like, our habits directly impact other people. It's not just like, oh, I should exercise more, eat some better food, or get some better sleep, because those are all like great things that we need to do, but the consequence isn't as immediate or as severe as the consequences for not developing good habits or in the pandemic.
Exactly. And it's so important to take a moment. And one of the articles gave us some tips on how to make that easier to help us manage this transition and that stress. And they said, make a commitment to it. Be intentional about the choices that you're going to make. Be flexible and know that things are going to change and adjust.
Mm-hmm.
Continue to practice. Just like in anything that we do, we need to practice, we need to keep going, and we need to keep repeating these behaviors so that they become a learned behavior and a natural behavior over time. And lastly, make sure you have everything you need. If you don't have that hand sanitizer with you where you need it, you're not going to use it, right?
Yep. I think of, when you talk about that, like, make sure you have what you need and practice it. I think of our camp has a really strict rule this summer about wearing a hat, essentially between like breakfast and dinner. Anytime you're outside or like not in the shade, you have to have a hat on your head, which is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic for sun safety. And it just becomes habit that you don't go outside without a hat on. And that's not part of my normal day-to-day life. Like, I mean, I'm wearing a hat right now, but that's not my norm. But yet in the summer, it becomes such an instinctive thing. Like, oh, I'm in this environment, I need to have a hat on my head. So that practicing really does make a difference.
It does. And I think that's the only way we can really, determine those new habits. I remember talking about habits early on in season 1 after I had read James Clear's books on atomic habits. And it's about, what do I do before I do this? So before I walk in my house, is there hand sanitizer outside my door? Is it right inside my door? Where am I keeping these things to help me be successful in forming these habits?
Hmm. That's great. I love that. Like, how can we help ourselves to be successful? I think is super important.
Yeah, there's just so much information out there on like tips and tricks. Like you just Google pandemic fatigue and you're going to go down this rabbit hole that just keeps going. But you're going to learn so much at the same time. One of the other things that I found that was when it was talking about like sticking to these new precautions and forming these habits, that it's even more difficult to do if you haven't been directly impacted.
Mm.
So if you don't know somebody who's been sick or passed away from it, but then there was also this population of people that thrive on risk and maybe aren't following them because they prefer to live a riskier lifestyle, which I found so intriguing.
That's fascinating, because a lot of people do find their like sense of adrenaline and their need for risk in the outdoors,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is fabulous. Lots of us love to like whitewater paddle or rock climbing. There's a sense of adrenaline and risk in there, and I think for a lot of us, we may not have been able to access those activities in the same way that we have before, as well. So finding healthy ways to have that sense of risk for sure is important. And I want to touch on, we said there about folks feeling like if they haven't been directly impacted by that.
Yeah.
And I think that's directly related to people who feel like they're giving up on their restrictions now, who they're like, well, it hasn't come into like my circle of people, or like the folks directly in my life, so like I can move on. Or um, people just start ignoring it and they're like, well, how can I get back to normal? And I don't think that this is necessarily because they're bad people or they don't care. I think we're just all exhausted. Like you said, like our bodies are physically exhausted and that takes a toll on us mentally.
Mm-hmm.
You were quoting me some stats about anxiety and depression rising in people because of the pandemic.
Yeah, the Canadian Mental Health Association has an article on their page, and we'll make sure we share that link as well. But they were talking about, there it is, uh, the increased thoughts about suicide during the pandemic and how people are actually faring with their mental health. And this is specific to Canada. Just going to put that out there, but I would encourage people to look at the area you're in as well. And they are finding that there are people that are now more vulnerable to suicide and to struggles with their mental health. Um, Specifically, like just 1 in 5 people who already had a mental health illness or mental health issues were struggling more.
Yeah, pandemic fatigue is real. And folks, this is the tough stuff that we said we've always talked about. And so, in planning for this episode, we debated whether or not we should skirt around this topic. But we have made a public commitment to all of you to talk about the hard things. And so, we're following through on that commitment. Pandemic fatigue is real, and we encourage people to continue to check in on each other,
Mm-hmm.
even as time goes on and we sort of adjust to this quote unquote new normal. We need to be checking in on each other. And something that I've seen a lot recently, especially on places like Twitter and different social media forums, is where there's a lot of blame being placed now on people. And I talked about this in our
Oh,
last episode about folks
yes.
blaming millennials. There's a lot of anger out there. And I think sometimes we cling to anger because it feels like a more aggressive emotion. Like it makes us feel like we have more control. Sitting in sadness feels like the world is attacking us. But when we can be proactive with our anger, it often feels like we have more control over the situation, which is even more important to us in a world where we have so little control over the pandemic these days. But I think trying to rein that in and being really thoughtful about how what we post on social media and how the effects of blaming people can affect other people, that can
Mm-hmm.
weigh really heavily. And let's think about like why people are leaving their houses, why people are out gathering in places. The pandemic has an incredible human effect, um, beyond the science behind the virus spreading. Like our lack and loss of humanness and human touch and human connection is playing a huge role in the mental health crisis that one could say that we're on the brink of if we're not already in. People have missed out on huge chunks of each other's lives. People who've had newborn children, people have missed out on that entire child's life. My friends have a 3-year-old that I'm really close with. You know, I haven't been in his life very much for the last 6 months, and that's a huge loss in a 3-year-old's life. Every time I see him, which now is only once every couple of months, usually from a distance, um, I'm like, wow, he's like grown up. He's become like this young child from this toddler.
Yeah.
So there's a huge sense of loss there, and we need to be more empathetic about that. Really flex our empathy muscle as to like why are folks acting the way they are. Is it because they need to get out and work their frontline jobs? Is it because they have sat in an apartment by themselves for months and months and they just crave some kind of human connection? Some folks haven't hugged somebody in 4 or 5 months, um, and that's really devastating. As human beings, we need that connection.
We do. And that's so, I really like how you stated all of that. And it kind of took me back to a piece I had read about the 4 stages of crisis fatigue. And as I read them again here, it's so speaking to how the last, I've lost track of how many months it's been really. Months have been in our lives. And it started with a heroic stage where we banded together and figured out how we
Mm-hmm.
were going to survive, right? That was pretty early on. Like, and then into the honeymoon stage. I think that makes sense. Like, we're in this together, we're all in the same boat. The storm might be a little bit different for each of us,
Mm-hmm.
but we saw that set. And then we went into a disillusionment stage where you kind of start to feel that exhaustion. And I think that's where are saying the hypervigilance is turning into more of irritation and rage and despair. So where we see those contradicting viewpoints on everything. And then we go into that fatigue stage where we experience that burnout and where we can be more easily triggered or withdrawn, where we are more likely to, engage in those risky behaviors. And it's where we see that increase in use of alcohol. Maybe for some people that might be food, it might be drugs, it might be suicidal thoughts or tendencies as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those unhealthy coping habits, or destructive coping habits can definitely
Mm-hmm.
start to come into play far more easily. And then another thing I think of is that we don't live in little, like boxes. This is not the only thing affecting us right now.
Oh,
Folks
yes.
around the world are being impacted by many different things. Like there's the fires right now. We're in the midst of hurricane season. There's other weather events happening places. Couple that with all of the social issues happening in the world right now with the Black Lives Matter movement and protests. Here in Canada, there's Indigenous protests happening right now as we speak, and people's lives are being impacted by that as well. coupled with the pandemic. So people are out at protests, they're defending their land, they're fighting fires, all while decked out in PPE. So those already stressful events are just coupled and like just elevated to a whole other level given the pandemic. So we need to be mindful of that as well. And as we'll say later on in the show as well, please reach out for professional help should you feel that you need it. Or even if you don't know if you're quite there yet, reach out if you're thinking about it to somebody who can listen. Reach out to your peers and check in on each other, folks.
And we'll reshare from one of our previous episodes in our show notes some places you can reach out to if you're not comfortable going to friends or family, just resources for you. And we'll make sure those are in these show notes as well.
So in the spirit of reaching out to each other, Cassie, where are you at with your pandemic fatigue and how are you coping right now?
You know, it's rough. I think I said it last week. It's like, sometimes I just like to pretend it doesn't work or it doesn't exist. And I tend to bury myself in my work. Not that I'm out going doing unrecommended activities, but that I'm just doing what I need to do or not doing anything at all. And I'm still not watching the news. Like I barely even catch our daily updates anymore. And I think that's partly due to going back to work and having something new in my life. But I also look at some of the coping habits that I've maybe developed, possibly not the best ones, but they're not horrible either, I would say. I tend to bake and then eat everything that I bake.
Well, now I wish I lived closer to you.
I've also like crushed Netflix and Disney Plus. Like I struggle to find new things to watch.
Fair enough.
But with the change in weather as we move into fall, I'm finding it harder to cope.
Well, especially because fall for you means a lot of rain and gray skies,
Yeah,
does it not?
it does. I moved away from the bitter cold and the snow to the rain.
I think it's interesting when you said, you know, I've developed some coping habits that aren't the best, but they're not terrible. And I think we all need to give ourselves a little bit of extra grace and kindness right now during this time that we're not going to have like the perfect self-help care habits. And as long as we're surviving, I think that that's really key. I think for me, I feel like I've been hitting a wall and then I back up from that wall and then I run full speed into it again, just like head first. Which is like an interesting experience for me because I have moments where I'm like, yeah, like it's okay. Like I can just do my own thing in my own little bubble. It'll be fine. And then other times I feel like I'm just like running into this wall repeatedly and I'm just like, oh my goodness, it's never going to end. And I'm in a place where currently like physically located where there's no active cases in the province. And so the idea of going back to Ontario with rising cases feels daunting. Even though I was living in it before, I'm feeling more lost and overwhelmed more frequently, which is has been unfamiliar to me in the past. And it's an uncomfortable place for me to sit in. And I also feel like I'm trying to find hope and finding that to be challenging. Like, where do I place my hope?
Oh my goodness, yes.
But I'm finding that like as I plan more routines, that's helping me. I'm trying to think of like things that I can do that are safe. And then also for me, being outside is so powerful for me. Feeling my feet physically on the ground, which gets harder as it gets colder, but taking my socks and shoes off and like feeling the grass underneath my feet or the wood of the deck. Opening the window so I can feel a breeze, even if it means I'm putting an extra sweater. I need to feel that connection to the outdoors, even in the city. That's been really, really powerful for me. And it just sort of like resets me a little bit. And then I'm being really intentional about reaching out to folks and saying to somebody like, wow, I'm hitting the wall right now. Like, can we chat? And it doesn't have to be about the pandemic. It could be about anything, but just to remind myself to have those pieces of connection. And then I turn off Twitter as well. That is helpful for me, and I need to remind myself of that.
Yeah, I never got on the Twitter boat, so there's moments where I'm like, oh, I'm grateful to myself for not doing that.
Fair. I'm in an interesting place now where my job involves COVID, like it's directly related. I work in risk management for a youth serving organization, so I need to know what's happening. I get asked regularly, so like what are the numbers like across Canada? What's happening today with COVID? So like I need to know it. So I try to stay up to date on what's happening across the country. The other day I listened to press conferences in three different countries, or three different provinces, all like one after another. trying to
Oh,
figure out what was going on and which new restrictions were coming into place, which also means that I'm dreaming about COVID right now and dreaming about restrictions. And so setting boundaries for me is really important. So when I talk about Twitter, which I think can be super useful for community connection, different perspectives, which I love to see as well. But I hit a point around noon or just after noon where most places have released their numbers for the day, and I log off at that point. I'm like, okay, that's enough. Because then it starts to get into a place of debating things, and that's where I see more of the anger come out and the frustration, and
more of
I
the
struggle
fatigue.
with that. Yeah, the fatigue like displays itself after a while. So it's like a daily cycle for me. I tune in, hear all the stuff, and then I log it.
How do you respond to that? Like, to me, if I had to like take in all that information on a daily basis, I would be exhausted.
It can be tiring. I'm also the kind of person who likes data, so I find
Yes.
good data sources. Um, where I'm actually like I'm looking for numbers. I'm not looking for predictions. There's lots of like biostatisticians online, epidemiologists that I follow, um, who are providing good data and good graphs. And so there's like scientific predictions versus just like socially based predictions. That's how I would sort of define it. So there's certain things like you can see the reproductive rate of the virus, which could predict for you in 2 weeks what the numbers are going to look like. And for me, that's more grounding than looking at people being like, can we guess when we're going to go into lockdown next? I find that really like challenging to deal with. So I try and step away from that. I also am going to start muting people on Facebook.
Oh,
Um,
yes. I have definitely like unsubscribe, unfollow, turn people off that just don't serve me anymore or don't serve me right now.
yeah, because I'm starting to see like people are posting things, and I'm starting to wonder, like, I wish I could ask the person, what were you hoping to accomplish by sharing this piece of information? What did you want to make people feel?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think about that before I post things on social media as well. And I wonder if more of us were to be more thoughtful about when we share something. Like, are we sharing that schools are closing or that numbers are rising because we're angry? Or are we upset? Are we sharing it in the hopes of reminding folks to wear their masks? Are we just sharing it because we're fed up? And what emotion are we coping with when we're sharing these things? And what are we evoking in other people?
Yeah. And I see that. And then it has me wondering of like, then how do those people who you're sharing that with, how are they responding to that? And how is it impacting them?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it possibly stirring up for somebody else as well?
Exactly. Because we're all in, as we said before, the same storm in different boats. And so
Yeah.
we need to be cognizant of that. So yeah, I try to set some boundaries around social media, but it's challenging as my job is directly impacted by the virus.
Yeah, as you say, boundaries. When we were getting ready for this episode, we talked about getting off the roller coaster.
Hmm. I love the good roller coaster metaphor. For anybody who's not familiar with this, as we discussed uh, just a time or two last season, about being on the roller coaster of the pandemic. So the ups and the downs, the moments where we feel like we've been thrown upside down. It's like a roller coaster that we never asked to get on, and we're having a hard time getting off of. And I particularly love this metaphor because I hate roller coasters. I get motion sick when I turn my office chair too quickly. I don't understand why you'd want to be strapped into a metal thing and flung around at high speeds till you think you're going to die. So this metaphor really resonates strongly with me.
Yeah, like we were talking about this. Is it our choice to get off the roller coaster? Is it where the pandemic is at, like where we're at? Is that when we get off the roller coaster? Is it when the vaccine is available? Like, how do we make adjustments and adapt? Like, where do we sit? Like, I want off this roller coaster some days.
Yeah, and when I think of getting off of the roller coaster, I think of finding ways so that the highs and the lows aren't as drastic, so that we can sort of reach that more neutral ground again. And I think when I've been talking with other folks and contemplating my own life, really think about being realistic and accepting where we're in. We have to move into that like acceptance stage that this is where we're at and trying to find some positives in it. And that's going to be hard, of course. And I speak from a place of privilege of being able to find some positives in this and that to address my privilege that I have a full-time job, that I have
Yeah.
a safe place to live and a comfortable place to live. That's a huge amount of privilege. And so I'm able to speak to that idea of finding positives. And I recognize that that isn't going to be the same for everybody else. But I think being realistic and accepting where we are, and then also seeking professional help as well, I think is going to be really key in this. If you really feel like you're riding a tons of highs and lows and you can't control the in between, if you're plunging from one to the other, that just talking this out with somebody who's sort of a neutral third party might be really, really helpful and help you find some strategies to get through this.
I think that's a great piece of advice, like from getting the help you need and seeking out a professional if you are at the, if that's what you need, or just seeking acceptance within yourself of where you are and what you're doing in the moment.
Hmm. I think this is a perfect place to pause. We're going to dive back into how we can find hope during this challenging time right after this short break. Did you know that ACA Illinois' primary work is getting young people to camp from communities that don't traditionally attend? This includes over 5,000 kids from low-income communities throughout the state of Illinois annually.
ACA Illinois accomplishes this by utilizing various partnerships, programs, and campership funds. They know that camp changes lives, and each year, young people are referred by social workers, teachers, and other referral agents because they feel the child would benefit greatly from a camp experience. ACA Illinois fosters these wonderful relationships to ensure more kids get to camp every summer.
Their work is driven by their passion to make the world a better place. Each and every member of ACA Illinois truly believes in what they do. They live and breathe their mission.
Actively working towards making camp accessible for all young people, ACA Illinois believes that no young person should be excluded from camp. While recognizing that finances are often a barrier to accessing camp programs, ACA Illinois has various programs to ensure that these barriers are lowered or removed for as many campers as possible.
Be sure to check out their incredible work they are doing and to learn more and see all the ways that you can get involved at acail.org. So finding hope in this tough time, Cassie, it's not an easy thing.
It's
It's something,
not.
it's something we've discussed a lot on this podcast and personally. Um, where do you feel like you're finding hope in this time?
So it's those in-person connections, or close as we can get to in-person connections right now with the people that matter most to me. And it's just being able to continue to have conversations, and conversations about things that usually aren't pandemic related. So like talking to my niece about her first week of grade 1 on her birthday. It was great. Hearing about all that they did in school and how she rode the bus and forgot her mask, but kept her mouth shut the whole time. It was just those little moments that, are fun and enjoyable. And this 6-year-old problem solved.
I love that. Yeah, I think finding moments with kids for me always brings me a lot of joy, especially coming from, a field like camping where we work with kids so often. They bring us so much joy. We can find a lot of hope in kids. I think in some of my other conversations that I've had with camp folks, when we talk about finding hope, a lot of it comes down to setting reasonable expectations, I think. So for me, it's not thinking about like planning a vacation. Let's say my partner's a teacher, so we have dreamt of going away for March break for the last few years, and we haven't gotten around to that. So instead of planning that, where it's less likely that we're going to be crossing a bunch of borders to go somewhere for a week over March break, it's thinking about going camping with one other family. We're going to have separate campsites because that's a realistic thing that we can do that's healthy and that's within the current restrictions. And I think that helps me find hope because it's a little bit of hope that I know I can cling to because there's a very, very good chance of it happening. I think for me, and I think for a lot of people as well, we need to leave this idea of back to normal at the door. And I realize that might be a bit of a controversial thing for me to say. But I think the longer that we strive to be back to normal, we're like, well, if we just get through this event, we'll be back to normal. If we just get through the summer, if we just get through the fall, like New Year's is going to happen and we're going to be back to normal. This is not a 2020 thing. We're adjusting our way of normal. And so I think making plans that are realistic and safe helps us adjust to a new normal and helps us put to rest this idea of returning back to normal.
Yeah, I really struggle with that return to normal concept and how and when and if it'll ever be a thing. How can we say that? We don't know where this is going. It changes so fast that keeping up with it is difficult.
When I think of like getting back to normal or a new normal, I think about working from home. And we've talked about this a little bit in previous seasons, but a lot of us are working from home a lot now. And one thing that I struggle with is working from home and becoming a bit of a workaholic, which I think all camp pros often are. We tend to want to work until we get the job done. My manager turned to me at one point this summer and said, you know, you don't have to work like 10-hour days in the summer. You're not at camp, Rachel. It's okay to turn off your computer when you're done work and actually walk away from it, not think about it. I was like, huh, that's cool.
Yeah, like even my new job right now, I'm like, it's pretty much a 9 to 5 type position, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Yet I find myself checking my email or sending staff messages on the communication tool that we use at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because it's habit, or is like, why do I feel the need to do that?
Yeah, I think setting boundaries around work is a challenging thing when we're working from home. Like, am I
Mhm.
supposed to take a lunch break? We used to take 45 minutes at the office. And I would sit and I would gather with a group of friends every day at lunch. So, am I supposed to do that now? If I leave my computer for half an hour to go for a walk, am I a slacker even though we used to take coffee breaks at the office? Or I would take that full lunch break? And it's easier and easier to slip into that routine of starting work a little bit early, working a little bit later. Um, and I think that that's like a slippery
Mhm.
slope the further we get into the pandemic, because, like we said, this is our new normal, working from home, and we need to start that off with as many healthy habits as possible, I think.
Yeah, and the part that I'm even struggling with more is not only do I have like my regular position, but I have a side gig. I have this podcast and I have a couple volunteer positions as well. And when am I supposed to do those and take time for myself? And I think that's where, like, even last night, I was prepping for this conversation right now. It was 9:30 at night. Should I be working on something?
Hmm.
But it was that or get up extra early to do it because of time zones.
Yeah, and I mean, we're always going to have to put in extra work for those extra side projects, right? And I
Yeah.
think as camp pros, a lot of us have those. We love them.
Mm-hmm.
Or we're, as young and emerging camp pros, we're looking for ways to further our career. And so sometimes putting that extra time is necessary. But how do we do that in ways that are healthy and balance that with, um, fun and social time and downtime in a time where those lines are even more blurred than ever before? Because in a pre-COVID world, it would have been easy to make a plan with a friend and have them expect you at 6 p.m. So you're going to stop working because you have to go to dinner or drinks with
Yeah.
a friend. Now it's easier to push that Zoom call because you're probably already all in your sweatpants. So if it happens at 6 or 7:30, it'll be fine, right? We
It'll
can
be
just
okay.
adjust.
Yeah.
Um,
And like that also has me going, like, well, how do we, oh, I just, never mind. I lost my train of thought. It's gone. Keep going.
that happens, like, and so how do we balance our mental health with work expectations? I think that's really key there. um, because a lot of us are working in jobs where the workload might be higher right now.
Yeah.
A lot of places have fewer staff working at them, and the workload is different than it used to be. We're all adapting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we balance our mental health with our expectations of our employers during all of this?
Oof. Oof. That's what I got. It's a good old oof. It's, and I think it's our mental health with work expectations around COVID as well. So, working in adventure tourism, we're managing the health of our staff as well as the wellness of the people that are, of our guests, the people that are coming to have an experience. And man, spikes and drops, that roller coaster on those, some of those days, it's hard.
Hmm. I can't imagine, because I'm fortunate enough to work from home, so I don't have to worry about interacting with the public on a daily basis, and that must take, like, put quite a strain on you, um, as well. Constantly having those, like, extra risks and that all of that to think about.
It is. It's hard, and we've worked really hard on like mask protocols just for our staff and making sure they're staying safe.
Hmm.
But as the fatigue and the pandemic fatigue wears on, we have to continue to reinforce that and remind them that, you know, we don't know where these people have been, and we need to make sure you're healthy so that you can continue to come to work.
For sure. And I think, like with anything, communication is key. Whether you're reporting to somebody and you say, wow, like today's been hard for me, I'm really feeling it today, and you can adjust your workload slightly in that way. Or if you're managing people, realizing that like folks are under more stress and pressure than ever
Yeah.
before, and it's not going away as we adjust to back to school, whether that's homeschooling or sending kids back to school. If you're working with folks who have kids, they're scared, they're tired. um, Folks who are working in education are scared and tired. And so we need to just be a little bit more gentle with everybody during this time and communicate how we're feeling around that, and with flexing our work schedules to adapt to that if we can. We often say in summer camping that it's a marathon and not a sprint. And this is the exact same way. You talked earlier about how, like, in the first stages of the pandemic, we were all keen to help each other out. We were on Zoom calls every night, and we
Yeah.
like had all these like cool ideas for new Zoom calls, and we were taking care of each other that way. And we need to continue to check in with that. We don't need to be on Zoom 5 evenings a week, when we're on Zoom all day long, but we need to, maybe those things that really excited us back at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe we need to like bring those out again and give those a try.
I love that idea. And like this conversation about like stress and emotions brought me to one of the articles that I researched and read, um, through actually through the CDC. And they have an article on coping with stress, and the pandemic can be stressful, and it had some great tips for taking care of your mental health, and realizing that everyone reacts to stress differently, and that's just so important. And what they're exposed to and what they do and how they interact is going to alter how they react to that stress. And as I read through those things, it was like, it was interesting to read all of these healthy ways to cope with stress. And I was like, I think each of these were in our recharge station in season one.
I love that. There's just so much to get into in this episode with pandemic fatigue. And I want to shift our lens a little bit as we look to 2021 and planning. Lots of folks are already there. If you're in the COVID-19 Slack group, there's a channel about summer 2021. Folks are chatting, folks are planning, which is fantastic. How do we take care of ourselves while planning for 2021 and being realistic? And we aren't experts in this. Nobody's an expert in this because nobody's planned for camp during a pandemic. We just haven't. We aren't there yet. We will be one day, and hopefully it'll be the last time we ever do this. But
I
let's,
actually just take a moment, make sure that you make good historical notes about what you did and why you made the decisions you did to help future camp professionals.
I
I'm just
love
going to
that.
say that.
Yeah, we're writing history, folks. So really think through those thought processes and get those down on paper or in your Google Doc so that they can be shared with future generations. I think to touch on this quickly, you need to decide on your organization's risk tolerance. Think about what risk you're willing to take on in summer 2021. We don't know if there's going to be a vaccine. So maybe that's the cutoff point for you, is do you run if there's no vaccine? Think about how you can build resiliency into your business, not only your business, but also with your staff. Um, and when we talk about being realistic, Cassie and I, for example, were like, yes, let's hit the conference circuit this year. And then we were like, wait a second, uh, that's not going to happen the way we thought it would. So we've submitted to speak at virtual conferences. So we've adapted our goals. We can be really excited about this. We can plan. We can think about furthering our careers, but it's going to look different than it would have in 2018 or 2019.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, as you said that, I'm like, that's interesting. Earlier in the pandemic, I had cut my goal of speaking at a conference
Hmm.
for the year. It's, I think it's back.
It is, that's for sure. Um, and then the other thing, and I really want to stress this before we dive into some other things as we're whipping our way through this episode today, is talk with people. And when I say talk, I think I really mean listen. At camp, we're really good at listening to people. We listen to kids.
Mhm.
We have all the time in the world. I know we've all sat and listened to a child talk for 45 minutes about their favorite fruit and their teacher and the Band-Aid they got last week. And the list goes on and on. So let's put that into practice. How can we be good at listening to people? How can we listen first and speak second to get the advice and perspectives of other people who differ from our own? And how can we build a stronger summer camp pro community and industry moving into 2021 by listening to each other and the different experiences that we've all had?
Yeah, I love that. That's just listen. Listen to each other. Which, like, I just finished doing one-on-ones with every single staff that works at the facility and site that I'm at. And a lot of it's talking about goals, a little bit of coaching. And a couple of them actually asked me about my goals, which was great because most of them didn't have questions for me, um, which we're going to work on that. But it was really hard for me to answer because so many of them, I've just kind of dropped them for the time being and not taken the time to reset them or reevaluate them or figure out what they look like now. But I also realized that right now I'm just like focusing kind of on week to week. So this week it was making sure I got up, got out of bed, and did some of my side gig work before going into my 9 to 5 job.
Mm-hmm.
And so that then I still had my evenings to do what I needed to do, to run those errands, to take care of me, to use some of my self-care habits.
I love that, looking at your goals and resetting them for this year. And I think that that's important. And I think that we uh, need to do that. A lot of camp folks are goal-oriented people, which is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. So let's look at those goals, look at our SMART goals, and how can we make them realistic and timely for the world that we're living in now? And which goals do we need to put a pin in for later on down the road when the world looks a little bit different?
Yeah.
As camp pros, we're fantastic at supporting folks. It's
Mm-hmm.
what we do, and it's why we love what we do. We build community. And when we're at camp, whether that be our day camp or overnight camp, we support our campers and our staff through everything. Even when a new situation comes up, we're always like, how can we support them? How can we move as a group through this? And I wonder, how can we bring that beyond the property lines? Like, what would we usually be doing with our kids if we were to have them gathered at camp right now? And how can we put that into the world? What needs do we need to be filling? And there are some camps that are doing a familiar and
Yes.
fantastic job of that. So let's learn from each other and really think about, if we aren't supporting our camp communities, how could we be doing that as we all work through this? And then, as always, I'm going to say it again, set some boundaries for yourselves. Turn your phone off. Don't give out your personal contact information. If you have your work email, that's fantastic, but people don't need to be texting you at midnight or 2 a.m. as they are worried about the pandemic or summer camp next year. Really allow yourself to have that space.
Yeah. That reminder for your do not disturb function, use
Mm-hmm.
it. Like that's still my favorite feature. It still exists because, you know, even though I don't give out my personal contact information to my staff, they still have access to our work messaging and communication tools that sends notifications. So that do not disturb that turns on at that certain hour and turns off gives me that guaranteed time where my phone is not going to make a sound.
And even, for example, between you and I, we are in different time zones. And so Slack
Yeah.
has an automatic
Mm-hmm.
do not disturb function, which is the platform that we use to communicate mostly. And it's fantastic because I can be working early in the morning and I know I'm not going to wake you up, and you can be working late at night and we can just catch up when we log back on at our typical hours the next day.
Yeah, it's great. It always throws me because it sends your message in my time zone. And I'm like, what was she doing at 5:30 in the morning? And then it takes me a minute. I'm like, oh, it's okay. That's my time.
I think one other thing I really want to touch on in terms of pandemic fatigue is, as we head into the fall season, it's full of holidays and gatherings and times when we would usually spend time together with our families and friends.
Mhm.
Um, Many of us might be fortunate enough to be able to attend these events. They might look different for a lot of us. But I'm going to remind you once again, you're allowed to set boundaries, and you absolutely should when it comes to talking about camp or the pandemic. You can front load things if you need to have conversations with folks to be like, I would love to talk about the effects of pandemic on summer camp. I just want you to know that I might react like this. Like, I might cry, I might get frustrated, and that's okay. And I would love for you to hold space with me for that. Are you okay to do that? Do you have the bandwidth to support this right now? Or saying, I don't want to talk about this, and choose your inner circle carefully. Um, Reach out to folks you know are going to support you in the way that you need it. Um, and the other thing is, get people on your side ahead of time. Find some allies. If you know that there's going to be someone who really like wants to get into this over a dinner that you're going to be at, see if your cousin will be on your side and help you reinforce that boundary with other people. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody in your team to be like, hey, I think Rachel really needs a break from talking about this right now. Like, let's talk about whatever's on TV, or this great dish that we're eating tonight.
Yeah, I think it's just also so important to reinforce that you can stop that conversation even after you've started it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can say, we can start this conversation, but at some point I might need out, and I'm going to say stop, or I'm going to say no. And I need you to respect that.
Totally.
Just it's that boundary, and knowing people that, letting people know that that boundary can change.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So as we wrap up here today, just another reminder that pandemic fatigue exists. It's out there. You may be experiencing it, you might not, but use the tools that you have, seek out the resources that you need, and know that there are people out there ready to talk, ready to listen, and support you as you need it. As always, we're going to end with our recharge station, which provides a self-care tool that's probably going to be helpful, we hope. But we believe that self-care is critical to personal wellness in the good times and the not so good times. It's also something that we as CAM professionals often struggle with. We want to give you tips, tricks, and tools to charge your batteries, help you feel inspired. Rachel, you've got a tool or a tip or trick for us today?
Yeah, so as we head into a changing season, I'm wondering what folks are doing for food. Have you found a new recipe lately? Are there foods that you typically would eat in the fall that you might not eat the rest of the year? Where I am, root vegetables become very popular again. So like the sweet potatoes and the squashes. So I'm excited to try some new recipes for this fall. We'll drop one or two into the show notes for you to check out. But find some food that really nourishes not only your body, but also your soul during this time.
Awesome. And if you think you have a recipe that we should try, happy to take it. You can send those to beyondcamp@gocamp.pro. We want to take a moment to thank you for joining us beyond camp. We hope that you were able to connect and reflect with us as we journey beyond the property lines and bring camp with us. Remember, you can always reach out to us with a discussion topic, a thought, or a question. Just email us. Again, that's beyondcamp@gocamp.pro. We want to send a big thank you to GoCamp Pro for continuing to hold space for these conversations on our new independent feed. To the team at ACA Illinois for their sponsorship and support of this idea. To our producer, Matt, I'm sorry. He'll know why. And to you, our listeners, thank you for your dedication and for listening and sitting with us in these hard conversations. And lastly, be sure to reach out and connect with us. You can reach myself, Cassie, at cassie.bloy@stefanricard.ca. Rachel?
Folks are always welcome to email me at kentar@girlguides.ca.
Please remember you can find all we talked about on our show notes at gocamp.pro/beyondcamp. And lastly, you can find all the other podcasts that are releasing episodes on a regular basis as well as part of the GoCamp Pro podcast network at gocamp.pro/podcasts. Go well and safely, friends. We'll see you next week.